what do you want to talk about? Alright, enough with the Cody Rhodes stuff. Let me first acknowledge a few things before I get into this WoW review. I know I'm walking into a minefield, but I need to be clear about a few things and why I chose to do this going into 2024. First and foremost, just for you fans out there, spoiler alert, yes, WoW is totally worth playing in 2024, and there's no reason for you to be ashamed about that or worried about it. That's fine, but I do have some heavy criticisms about World of Warcraft, and I know that many of you WoW faithful are not going to agree with me, and I have a thought on that at the conclusion of this video. Now, for full transparency, yes, I have a personal bias against World of Warcraft and Blizzard Activision as a company for a litany of reasons based around the treatment of their employees and their fans. I'm also not a fan of companies exploiting their employees and their fans by doing the bare minimum, by copying and pasting the same dreck that they did from years before, with no improvements or very few, and not evolving their monetization practice to a much more ethical one. Which brings me to my biggest issue, and it's not the game, because the game is actually a lot of fun to play. And it's not even the monetization necessarily, because, for a game that's been out for almost 20 years, it'll be 20 years this year, asking for $15 a month, I can live with that. It's the community that lives within World of Warcraft. A community that back in 2007 killed my love for MMOs for 3 solid years. Ultimately, it was WoW that drove me out of playing MMOs and then traumatized me into playing solo ever since I got back into them. I told myself that once I had healed through a lot of that, I would confront this. This is quite possibly the most successful MMORPG in the history of the industry. Now again, this game is totally worth playing, and I am going to do my best to be as objective as possible about World of Warcraft. But this is more a cautionary tale on how getting involved with games with huge communities can sometimes bite you in the butt. This is a cautionary tale about joining up with these communities. It's not just WoW, it's also Call of Duty, Apex Legends, Elder Scrolls Online, Star Trek Online, any game community, any community in general. There's always a very small but impactful toxic element to it. So with all that being said, let's get into this. World of Warcraft, yeah, we're getting into it, was released in November of 2004, 2 weeks after EverQuest 2, and stomped out the competition with relative ease. WoW brought a unique but colorful art style, clean and crisp gameplay, and an alternative to the king at the time, EverQuest. This successful launch would end up making WoW the new industry standard for MMORPGs across the globe, with many companies making WoW clones, and some of them being so blatant, they just took assets straight from WoW. Looking at you, Runes of Magic. So let's talk why WoW is worth playing in 2024 and beyond, but why you should enter at your own peril. The new player experience starts with which version of WoW you're playing. You now have 3 versions of WoW to play. You have Retail, which is the most commonly played version, Classic, which is the original WoW experience from 2004 with some tweaks, and now Classic Hardcore, where there's permadeath. The raids videos are something to watch. Once you decide which you're going to be playing, I chose Retail for this video, you'll create your character. Your race determines your allegiance. You can either be an alliance, which has humans, dwarves, night elves, gnomes, draenei, and worgen, or you can be the horde, that has orcs, undead, tauren, trolls, blood elves, and goblins. There's also the Pandaren and Drakthir races that can be played on either side. The classes are race locked, and that drives me nuts. The classes are, and it's a list: Warrior, Hunter, Paladin, Rogue, Priest, Shaman, Mage, Warlock, Monk, Druid, Demon Hunter, Death Knight, and Evoker, which is exclusively available for the Drakthir race and vice versa. I have played my fair share of classes back in 2007, just to figure out what class would be best for me, and during that time, the melee combat was boring, but with almost 20 years of updates and improvements, the combat for this tab target juggernaut has vastly improved in some areas, but not others. More on that later. Here's where you'll run into your first unexplained choice. Once you create your character, you are given the choice of the Exiled Lands or some other starting area. If you choose the Exiled Lands, you'll be taken through a well-designed and thought-out tutorial of WoW, and it will give you a sense of understanding of how the game as a whole and how many of the systems work within it. My experience of this new area felt welcoming to new and returning players, as it was straightforward into getting the player up to speed. It felt great to play. If you choose the other starting area, you'll be taken to your race's standard starting area with a much less up to par, but still effective tutorial. This is definitely a starting area for returning players that are looking for that feeling of nostalgia. I remember making my first undead character and then deleting it 2 hours later because I hated his slouch. Each unique starting area feels like this is where a player should start when beginning the game, but it doesn't teach you a lot of the deep systems or how to really play the game as intuitively as the newer and updated starting area. Good, but not for a casual or new player that would like to experience this for the first time, in my opinion. But overall, this is a great start to the game. WoW is your typical tab target MMORPG with all of the conventions that come with tab target games, except for with far more polish and care. Any game from basically 2004 and on has this tried and true control scheme and basic gameplay that WoW kind of cemented. Remember that EverQuest uses arrow keys as default movement, and WoW helped mainstream WASD movement as it felt far more fluid and natural for most players. Sorry to my left-handed friends. WoW is a holy trinity game, a tank/DPS/support trifecta of constant group balancing between its 13 classes, which all have specializations for different playstyles. The melee classes can be very boring in early game. I started with a monk, but the monk doesn't feel like a monk. It feels underwhelming and too weak. Even if you focus on DPS, the monk feels slow and plodding. The rogue feels swift and crits hard, but can be extremely frustrating because your survivability is pretty much limited. And don't get me started on casters, because a sharp gust of wind will kill you if you don't buff before leaving any main city. I'm joking. Casters are just as dangerous as their melee counterparts, but with magic. But they do have to stand still with certain spells, making them easy targets for AoE attacks and mobs. I found that the warrior can be very boring because they start you with a simple palette of skills that require rage to become effective. This is something that WoW and Blizzard as a whole has been really good at, and that's resource management for its classes. Warriors have rage, rogues have stamina, mages magic. While this is balanced for the most part, there is a bit of a learning curve to understand for what classes you are going to be playing for that to be effective. I ultimately went back to the last class I played before abandoning MMOs, which was the Hunter, for its, basically relatively high survivability and pet companion. This is gameplay that any MMO player is familiar with, and it has been the standard for what feels like ages, so there's no reason to really critique this gameplay. Sure, it's not action combat or even soft target like Guild Wars 2, but it's the industry standard, but just at a higher quality. So, I'm not going to get into the features too much of WoW, because if you've played practically any MMO, you already know. Crafting, PvP, dungeons, instances, raids, battlegrounds, and a bunch of other systems, but this is the part where I tell you why I left MMOs for 3 years, because this is crucial to understanding why I started doing these videos in the first place. So, here's the one feature that is core to any MMORPG. It's community. The sad thing is, if there's a fair portion of the community that is toxic, it's going to deter players, and that comes down to tribalism. Tribalism is a real thing, and it's also has the biggest impact in a game. While playing WoW back in March of 2007, shortly after Burning Crusade released, I had my first experience of true tribalism and bullying in a game. It's a long tale, so the short version is, started playing after being convinced to play by coworkers and was gifted a WoW account, checked out some classes, asked for some help, got none from the coworkers or friends, found a group, group let me die in Wailing Caverns, didn't res me, took all of the loot, and then told me to, quote, "Get out of our game, noob. If you don't know what you're doing, stop playing." They reported me for harassment when I had questioned their motives. I asked my coworkers again for help, and they told me both in-game and IRL, "Let us know when you get to cap, then we'll help." This is a new game with new systems, and I have no idea what to look for, and now no one to trust. Sure, I was blinded by altruism and the thought that I was an actual member of a MMO community. I found out the hard way that people suck. When I played EverQuest, there were people constantly asking me to help because they wanted to group up, because grouping up meant more XP. Even the UO groups weren't anywhere near as bad as WoW players were. It's a bit sketchy with Dark Ages of Camelot, however. Look, I get it. I get that people play for different reasons, and maybe I was on the wrong server, but it was a PvE-focused server. For some people, they play for RP, others to grind, and most are collectors of some sort. But then there's this tribal mentality in regards to the competitive aspect of the game, more so in PvP. There are people that just play to get the best gear and beat everyone on the server. None of that is bad, but it's how it's done. And Blizzard can't police everyone and everything. Hell, no game can. WoW is loaded from pillar to post in deep, rich story and gameplay that can get you sucked in for months at a time, giving you a second life, so to speak. But it's those bad characters that can ruin the entire experience. Clearly, over time, servers have become unofficially dedicated to specific styles of gameplay. I'm looking at you, Moonguard, but you're going to have to do some research if you're going to want to figure out what play style there is and what servers to jump on to find that style. For me, the WoW community isn't the worst anymore, but it is very uncomfortable for me to just play because my previous experience, it wasn't inviting or a pleasant one. Now, if you can deal with or avoid those players, you won't have a horrible time in WoW. Actually, it'll be an amazing time. But those people are there, and they are looking for easy marks. So I don't say this often in regards to a cash shop, but this cash shop doesn't suck. It's primarily cosmetic outside of some boosters, but it's nothing game-breaking. This is exactly as it should be for a game with a sub. And once you get to a certain amount of gold, you can pay for your WoW sub with in-game money. More sub-based games should do this, as it encourages players to keep playing your game, as it pays for itself if you know about the economy. This is significantly better than most cash shops like Rift or Lotro, and dare I say a superior cash shop to the Zen store. So, like I said at the beginning, of course WoW is worth playing in 2024. Sure, it may not be the king anymore, but it's still active, constantly updated and supported, and genuinely an amazing world to get lost in. The combat is much improved, but still tab target, but it could learn a thing or two from Guild Wars by going soft target. Dungeons are fun, even if you find them to be confusing at times, and the overall gameplay experience is the reason why for about 15 years WoW was king. But it's that toxic part of the community that bothers me. Between the trolls, hate comments, and flat-out bullying over a video game, it tells me that we have so much more work that needs to be done on both sides of the gaming space. Administrators need to be trustworthy to their communities, so that when an issue like bullying pops up, they can adjudicate efficiently and fairly. When you have problem players, send them to a prison server. Give them a chance to appeal after a certain amount of time to go back to those other servers, but a second violation means a permanent stay on a prison server. Continued violations on the prison server can escalate to a permanent ban from the game. Sure, they can make another account and start all over again, but it's their money and they can spend it however they want. The issue is that MMOs are about the multiplayer experience, and it should be inclusive to all players, new and veteran alike. The frustrations of the world shouldn't spill into your place where you seek peace and brings you the most joy. Hyper-competitive esports are around for those that seek glory and should be contained to a server as not to ruin another player's experience. Always remember that at one point, you were a noob. Sure, you put in the work, but imagine if someone you love came to you to play your game and someone treated them the same way somebody bullied you. It would probably sour their fun, and they may never play that game, or any game for that matter, with you. All I want in 2024 is for players to remember that we, gamers, love video games. So let's love video games together and stop being so tribalistic about it. They're all video games, and gaming is for everyone. So why don't you tell me in the comments about your WoW experience or any gaming experience that you've had? Also, make a friend in the comments, because we can't keep gaming alive if we don't work together to make the gaming space better. And finally, go to MMOBomb.com for all of the news in the realm of the multiplayer. Stay safe, stay sick, and remember that gaming is for everyone. I'll see you on the other side.